Merhaba arkadaşlar, hoş geldiniz. Welcome to my talks. Uh, so I will be speaking in English today. So first, let me say that I'm really excited to be here. So my name is Serhat Can, and I work at Atlassian. And today we are going to talk about DevOps. So let me share my screen first. Okay, I think it's live. So my talk is how DevOps changed the way we operate software. So as I said, we are going to be talking about DevOps today, and I'm pretty sure you have heard about DevOps before, but still, I think a lot of people have confusion, especially if they are not like hands-on. They are not working on the technical part of things. So I think this fundamental, let's say, talks are still very useful. And I'm gonna try to make this talk fun. So we are gonna be talking about Formula One and ants. So we are going to learn basically how DevOps changed the way we operate software. But it's tricky because obviously there is no right or wrong answer, because there is no like one size fits for all kind of thing in software development. As you know, software is complex, but especially when we are talking about humans, things get a lot more chaotic, and that's fine. And after all, I mean, as you see, we cannot even agree on how to spell DevOps. I mean, there are different variations, and all of them are fine. So what I said today is partly my experience and partly me talking with other DevOps folks all around the world. But your experience may be a little bit different, could be a little bit different. But as far as I see, these are the way that DevOps changed our software approach. So just a little bit about me. I work at Atlassian. Before I became a technical evangelist, I was working as an engineer for about 5 years. I'm part of the Ops Genie team for 5 years, more than 5 years now. And I'm an active speaker for AWS events. I'm also an organizer. So AWS selected me as an AWS community hero. I'm a hero for more than 2 years now. I'm also a conference organizer for Devops Days global events. I help the global team. I'm part of the core team member, one of the core team members. I also organize Devops Days Istanbul, AWS Community Day Turkey, and Serverless Days Istanbul conferences. And I'm also co-organizing Cloud and Serverless Turkey and Devops Turkey communities. Again, thank you for inviting me to speak. Today. I'm really excited to be with you. And I will be, after my talk, I will be on the event platform and will answer your questions if you have one. So I will stick around. So please feel free to ask any questions you may have. So let's talk about DevOps. So as always, I mean, let's talk a little bit about why before we go into the how part, because we need to understand why we needed DevOps to be able to appreciate how it changed the software industry, right? So traditionally, developers, as you know, developers were writing code, and ops people were responsible for running that code on production. But when this happens, there is a lot of friction, slowness, and disconflict. When developers don't have responsibilities on software delivery to production, they do not get feedback on their code. If they do not get feedback on their code, then they don't have a lot of empathy for the ops team, because they don't know how things works. But if they get feedback, usually, even if they get feedback, usually it's too late or not considered their responsibility. So they don't feel the need to act on that feedback. So when problems occur, it is easy to blame the other team who is already responsible for running the code on production. So that's their responsibility. And when we look at the ops team, it is a similar story. So they blame the developers to write shitty code, as you know, and deal with alerts all day long. So there is no time for automation. So this separation of responsibilities creates a lot of friction, a lot of this conflict between these teams. So the main problem in the story is the wrong incentives and missing communication between these teams. And DevOps aims to solve this problem by breaking the barriers between these teams and allowing them to learn from each other. So there are different definitions of DevOps, and the original, let's say, founders, I don't want to say founders, but basically the people who are first thinking about and talking about this idea didn't make an official statement, definition statement, because every company and person are different. But they talk a lot about some common features. So let's take a look at two of my favorite DevOps definitions. So the first one is one of the core members of DevOps days, Cam McGrage. I really like this definition. It's simple but powerful. He says DevOps is a culture where people, regardless of their title or backgrounds, work together to imagine, develop, deploy, and operate a system. So this definition focuses on collaboration between teams throughout the software development lifecycle. And that's important. It's not just that you are not separating stages. Teams work together for each stage of the software development lifecycle, and I really like it. And the other one is a bit more detailed. It's from the AWS's official Amazon Web Services official web page on DevOps. They describe DevOps as the combination of cultural philosophies, practices, and tools. This part is important because some people just say DevOps is culture. Some people will talk a lot about tools, but it is the combination of three things: philosophies, practices, and tools. And the goal is to deliver applications at high velocity. High velocity means less expensive. Also, when code is on production, then the real cost actually begins. So it shouldn't be expensive to run up an update, and DevOps, makes things faster and essentially cheaper. And obviously, fast is really important because for organizations to stay relevant, they need to innovate fast. Nowadays, as you know, things are going pretty fast, so they need to be fast while developing and while on production. So I will not make my own definition, but instead I want to move on to the how part and explain my points. So I will not give one definition, but I will explain the hows. So hopefully it will give you an idea of how I think about DevOps and how DevOps changed the way we prepare software. And as you know, regardless of the definition, companies have realities. So DevOps changed certain aspects of software development and operations, but things can change based on where the company is on their journey to DevOps. So let's, after some definitions, let's talk a little bit about ants. So not sure how many of you watch Bug Wars, but I watch a lot of them. I really like them. And if you watch them, you know that ants usually win. Even though usually they are small in size, they usually win. And their strength lies in their numbers. But the key is that strength lies in numbers only if they work together. So individually, they are not particularly the strongest among those bugs, but they are great at working together and coordinating their activities. So software teams are not that different. Software teams are also strong when they work together, and individual efforts sometimes matters, but over the long run, they don't matter that much, especially for big and complex software projects. So if we make our teams stronger, if we make our teams collaborate better, they are stronger. That is why it is crucial to create a shared responsibility. That's our number one how for today. So we need to create a shared responsibility among DevOps people, create the right incentives for them to work together. So there are different ways to create this culture of shared responsibilities. Obviously, there are some specific practices that you can apply, but I'm going to talk about like some cultural points, important points today. First, teams should around one customer-oriented goal. Their customers come first. That customer could be an internal or external one. can be another team, or can be an end user. But their main goal is to solve their customers' problems, not fix the software or not anything else. Their first goal, their major goal, is to fix customers' problems so they can be happy. And the second one is the leadership support. To create a culture of shared responsibility, without leaders like empowering teams, giving them ownership, their impact stays limited. To be able to achieve collaboration between teams, leaders must repeat the same principles and commit the necessary investment in tools and practices. It is important because a lot of the time, leadership, if they don't support this transition, they start complaining about how more expensive this transition is becoming, because they cannot really see how it will change over the long run. That is why it is important that leaders also understand what DevOps is and how it can help their companies. And the third one is transparency, open communication. So for a clear and effective communication, it is important for teams to know their goals, roadmap, and learn about the updates. I mean, even if they are high level, if you know other teams' responsibilities or their goals, you can, empathize with them. They are useful for teams to unite together. So please talk with other teams and share your roadmap, learn about their updates. And the last one, of course, not the least important one, is ownership. So our goal is to increase people's ownership so they make the best decisions over the long run and take responsibility. So, and I cannot go on to the next part before I mention how effective delivery pipelines are to achieve this culture of shared responsibility. When software testing and shipping cycle is automated, when the responsibility in shipping code to testing environment or production is automated, you start seeing people complain a lot less. And teams start operating with less dependencies and more visibility. So they do not depend on another team to send an update to a staging environment, for example. That's really powerful. And, do you remember we mentioned speed of software delivery? That's one of the key reasons we go into this DevOps journey. So let's talk a little bit about speed, Formula One. I mean, they are masters of speed after all, right? So the second part. So you're a team that builds race cars, and mechanics build the cars and drivers operate them. But consider this. I mean, what happens when mechanics don't drive, just build, and drivers do not understand mechanics and just they are responsible for driving? Let me assure you, things won't go well. You will be lucky to finish the race. These responsibilities has to be shared ones. This responsibility has to go both ways. Mechanics should be able to drive the cars, but even more importantly, drivers should be able to understand about car and its parts. And let me give you an example. F1 drivers know their engines so intimately that they can usually report issues before the engineers see it on their telemetries, even faster than software. And one example, famously, Michael Schumacher could tell his engineers when one of the valves was not sealing properly, and that happens when driving at over 300 kilometers per hour, racing for position, and on multiple occasions, drivers communicated to the pit on an impending engine blow up before even the engineers could confirm it. So racing for a professional outfit requires intimate understanding of each component of the car, not just engines. And drivers usually provide feedback on the aero changes that they want. For example, drivers would say before pit stop that change the angle of the nose swing by 3 rotations, something like that. And they talk about what the wheels are doing, brake, tires, and so much more. So giving the right feedback after sessions is important. Then going out and doing all out racing. So how is this related to DevOps? So it is very much related indeed. So just as we cannot expect F1 drivers to just drive, we cannot expect developers to just write code anymore. that's a story from 20 years ago. So developers should take part in software delivery and operations as well. They need to get alerts. They need to be on call when things go sideways. And there are three major benefits here. So the first one is we have ever increasing demands from customers, right? They expect more uptime. They expect more security, reliability, and all that. There is no way we can meet these requirements if we do not ask developers to take part in operations. And the second one is dev and ops empathy. So if developers experience the problems that operations people experience from the first time, they get alerts, they get up in the middle of the night, then it is much easier for them to think about operations during the development. So they start caring about things like testing, automation, the things that they do not care before. And the last one is developers and development and management, between development and management. So if management teams sees that the efforts that development teams spend on operations, now they can clearly understand how important these things are. But if developers are not responsible, then the operations people, this whole operations things are operations team's responsibility, then it's easy to blame that team when things go sideways. But the reality is it's much more complex than just, operations is just much more complex than it cannot become one small team's job. So if we give developers ownership, if we give them responsibilities on production, these three major benefits, we can see these three major benefits. And nowadays, referring to back to Formula One, we don't have to build many things ourselves. And many F1 teams don't build their engines, and they use it from other companies, other teams. They are pretty successful in the competition as well. So I have to mention cloud here because it's for a lot of teams, at least, it's very much related. Cloud-enabled companies, cloud and DevOps-enabled companies to achieve the same thing. DevOps changed the way we approach software ownership. And operations, obviously, is a long game and it's expensive. So you should be able to leverage open source or commercial software to automate and not care about things that are not our, let's say, major benefits. And that change that DevOps brings usually. The change that DevOps brings using actual code and APIs to manage infrastructure changed how we approach traditional operations. So we now don't have to build many things from scratch. So we can turn traditional ops into an engineering role. But of course, this doesn't mean just using Docker, Kubernetes, or Jenkins, and everything will be fine. That's not how it works. So this means following best practices like infrastructure as code in operations. So we should be codifying our infra and tools provisioning. And the fun part begins when automations becomes our actual job though. So that is why it is important to avoid automate everything, but we need to focus on what matters to us. So we need to automate what matters. Otherwise, automation just becomes our job. It's also important. A lot of teams make this mistake. And of course, I have to mention pest and cattle analogy. So it's mostly used for cloud, but it's applicable for DevOps as well. So when we create reusable infrastructure, instead of naming our servers to superhero names or something else, we start using automation practices like infrastructure as code. So with modern practices to automation, DevOps reduce complexity and we can apply learning from development to operations through this, infrastructure as code, like automation practices. And another major way that DevOps changed our approach to software is how we design and architect. And I really like this quote: a good intention with a bad approach often leads to a poor result. So our goal may be good, but if we don't build the necessary required architecture that will foster collaboration and ownership, no matter what we do, we will not be able to achieve our goal. So it's important to also not just approach, but also apply good practices. And microservices have become popular in the last decade, along with DevOps. Without DevOps practices, of course, microservices would just create chaos. And lots of investment into operations and automation, are required for healthy microservices environment. And microservices is needed not because we need to scale our applications, but because we need to scale our organizations. That's important. DevOps is the same. We have a lot of people and teams, and we need to reduce their dependencies, use automation, and foster the collaboration between them with shared responsibilities. So if you are going for microservices, I'm not saying that you should analyze your teams and design on the right time, because microservices are complex, but you need to, it's important that you need to do it to scale your organization, not your applications. And when teams design and architect to foster collaboration and ownership, they apply DevOps practices like continuous integration and delivery in their pipelines, and they start treating infrastructure as code that helps them have fewer bugs and outages. And there is this research by Atlassian that 57% of teams report fewer bugs and outages after they adopt CI/CD solutions. So essentially, these CI/CD-like practices that DevOps brings makes companies lose less money and move faster with safer changes. Sorry. And the last item, how DevOps changed in our industry. Our industry is measurement for key success metrics. And we know that, obviously, everyone knows that it's important to measure, but it's really hard without much visibility. And also with DevOps, we came to realize that business comes first. So we need to track and measure what is important for the business. And one important concept emerging from site reliability engineering, you may have heard about it from Google. They originated SRE movement, site reliability engineering. So an very important idea from that SRE practices is service level objectives. So you can obviously call it whatever you want and make these service level objectives, SLOs, make them for your team. But fundamentally, the goal is to tie business goals to operational goals. For example, service X should return 99.9% of HTTP requests, should respond to 99.9% of HTTP requests under 10 milliseconds, for example. This objective has a direct effect on customers' happiness and critical for them. And the best way to set the right objectives is to talk with the customers. And we need to remember, as I said earlier in my presentation, customers come first, not the software itself. So one example would be, for example, testing might be important for your team, and you can have a goal about like testing coverage for your team, but that doesn't mean anything for your customer. Customers care about things like speed or security or reliability. So you need to set up goals for your customers as part of this SRE concept, service level objectives. And another approach to measure DevOps success is these four metrics. These metrics: lead time for changes, deployment frequency, time to restore service, and change failure rate. These metrics are great indicators of how well your teams are empowered to operate on their own, how stable these automated pipelines are, and how prepared teams are to solve incidents as they happen. And obviously, no matter what, incidents will happen. And I don't have a separate item for this, but I have to mention DevOps also is about empathy. So it's important to while measuring successes, failures, whatever, you need to be blameless. You need to communicate clearly and without blame. That's important, because if you blame people, that definitely backfires. There is no point in doing that. So it's important to analyze without blame. So just to wrap up, how DevOps changed the way we prepare software. So with DevOps, we strive to create a shared responsibility among developers and operations. We need to create the right incentives. And one important, I think this is one of the most critical parts. Before, as you know, developers did not have a lot of responsibilities on the way to production or in production, on production. But with DevOps, developers started taking ownership, more ownership on the operations parts. Without this, I think DevOps still, you will not be doing, you will not be achieving the right benefits if you don't give developers more responsibilities. And another way that DevOps changed our approach is operations. Operations is not just writing shell scripts anymore. It became an engineering role with automation, especially with automation. We need to build architectures to foster collaboration and ownership. With DevOps, I mean, if we want to get the benefits without the right architecture that will foster collaboration and ownership, you cannot achieve it. So it's important to put importance on the architecture as well. And you need to start measuring what matters for the business, not just for your team. And DevOps with SLO, especially SLO with serviceable objectives, changed this. So thank you very much for coming to my talk and listening to me today. I really appreciate it. And thank you for the organizers for this great event. And if you want to stay in touch, you can follow me on Twitter at SRHTCN. You can add me on LinkedIn, or if you have a specific question about today's talk, I will be looking at the questions on my page, event page, and we'll answer your questions right after my talk. So thank you again. Stay safe, stay healthy. Have a good day.